Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
I'm going to have to take that home. I can use it. Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Congressman Jim Renacci, and I'm also a strong supporter and prior speaker here at the City Club. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Corey R. Lewandowski. Corey is a friend and someone who is in a unique position to offer a perspective on President Trump's first 6 months in office. But remember, he does not work for the administration, so his comments are his and may not reflect the opinion or position of the president or his administration. But I'm still very pleased that he could join us here today. Corey served as the chief political advisor for the campaign and campaign manager to Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. In those roles, he is credited, as expressed in the Los Angeles Times, for orchestrating Trump's unlikely rise during the primary season. Under Mr. Lewandowski's leadership, Mr. Trump won 38 Republican primaries and caucuses and received more votes than any other presidential candidate in the history of the Republican Party, while only spending a fraction of the money that the other competitors spent over the same period of time. Mr. Lewandowski is credited with running a skillfully disruptive political campaign and is often cited as a visionary on understanding the moods and pulse of the American people. He previously served as the National Director of Voter Registration of Americans for Prosperity and Americans for Prosperity Foundation. He also is the former East Coast Regional Director for both organizations and served as the State Director for New Hampshire, starting the chapters for those groups in 2008. Mr. Lewandowski also worked as the Legislative Political Director for the Northeast region for the Republican National Committee, as well as senior positions with several members of Congress. He received his MA in Political Science from the American University in Washington, D.C., and his BA in Political Science from the University of Massachusetts. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, please join me in welcoming Corey R. Lewandowski.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Dan, for the invitation. Thank you, members of the City Club. I want to first express how grateful I am for the privilege to come here and speak with you today. And understanding the history of this amazing organization is very important to me. What the Congressman left out was I'm a bit of an Ohio native in the sense that I was a chief of staff to a congressman from Ohio for 4 years from the southeastern part of the state in a little area called Belmont County. And that was a congressional district that served from the West Virginia border out to Licking County, almost in Columbus, and then ran north and south along 77, and Guernsey County was kind of the central hub of that congressional district. So I know Ohio well, and during my time here, understood the importance of the City Club and the luminaries who have come before me, and I don't pretend or purport to be of the caliber of the people who've spoken before you, and so I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. Let me say this. I think Donald Trump is the greatest political phenomenon of our lifetime. For everything that he has attempted to achieve, he has been successful. Whether it has been in the New York real estate world, whether it has been on television with hit television shows, whether it has been as a best-selling author, and now, the greatest accomplishment of anyone's life is being elected the leader of the free world. And I want to just take you back to the beginning of the campaign. In January of 2015, long before anybody ever thought Donald Trump was truly going to run for office, I was asked to come meet then Mr. Trump on the 26th floor of Trump Tower to speak to him about running a potential campaign for president. Like many of you, Donald Trump had told many of us that he was going to flirt with running, and nobody really believed he was going to run until I had the privilege of sitting down with Mr. Trump in early January of 2015. And when I sat down with him, I saw the resolve of an individual who didn't need to be the president to have a great lifestyle and didn't need the job after he was the president to make a lot of money. And he said to me, you know, Corey, I'm going to have a great life. I have all the money I ever need. I've got a great Air Force on my own. I've got private planes, helicopters, homes all over the world. I don't need to do this so that my children are going to be okay, or my grandchildren. We're going to do just fine. I need to do it because the country's broken, and I think I can fix it. And that unique experience, 25 minutes later, had me stand up from my chair in Trump Tower on the 26th floor, and he shook my hand and he said, you start working for me tomorrow. You're now my campaign manager. Now, truth be told, I didn't tell my wife I was coming to New York to look for a new job because I didn't know I was going to New York to look for a new job. So it was a little bit troubling when I called her after that meeting. But like many of you, I thought, you know what? Working for Donald Trump for a brief stint as a political advisor can't be bad for my career. He's a very wealthy guy, has a lot of friends. Maybe if this doesn't go well, I'll be able to parlay this into something else. And just prior to this position, I was working for the family of the Kochs, Charles and David Koch. I had spent at that point about 7 years working for the Koch family. So I had a very good, stable, safe, secure job that allowed me to be home with my children, which I have 4 of. But what I saw in Donald Trump is a man who was willing to put his own fortune forward, to take an enormous amount of scrutiny from the mainstream media, to do so for somebody who didn't need the job but wanted to do it. And back in January, and then fast forward to June of 2015, potentially the greatest Republican field of all times was established. When you look at the individuals who were going to run for president, we had the son and brother of a former president. We had well-known governors of big states. We had executives who had been in the business world. We had sitting senators whose fathers had run for president in the past. Name ID, individuals who had run and won already in specific primary races. And I'm thinking of states like Iowa with Mike Huckabee and those individuals. And we get into a race on June 16th where most people said we shouldn't go to Iowa and can't compete there because Donald Trump has now on his 3rd marriage and at a previous iteration was a Democrat, now turned to be a Republican. And what we saw very quickly as we traveled the country for the first 6 months before we launched the campaign and then the 6 months after that was that the American people were tired of a broken Washington, D.C., a system where Republicans and Democrats alike have lied to us for 30 years, where we're sitting on $20 trillion in debt, where there's no accountability on either side, where members of Congress and the U.S. Senate will say and do things in their respective states and go back to Washington and do something completely different. And for the first time in my lifetime, we have a candidate who's running who doesn't need money to run his campaign. We didn't solicit any money. Hasn't been beholden to the Washington special interests or surrounded by 30 years of Washington dogma of the way things are always going to do it. And someone who's going to bring a business perspective to the federal government. And that message, which was liberating to many people and troubling to others, was from the heart. And it's the same message if you look back at Donald Trump since the mid-1990s and even before that, a Today Show interview in 1989 where he talks about the U.S. not negotiating well and having our lunch eaten by other countries who are taking advantage of us. If you listen to his talk back then where he proposed at the time wealthy 1%ers should all pay a large sum in their taxes to get our deficit down to 0 for the first time, and he was willing to write that check because the understanding of the burden of a massive deficit on our economy is incomprehensible to business executives who have to meet a payroll every day. But let me tell you what we were up against. We weren't just up against 16 well-qualified Republican candidates who are well-funded and had all of the resources that they had in front of them. Let me tell you what some of the media was like. Michael Smerconish, the CNN commentator, called Donald Trump the George Costanza of the 2016 election cycle, a Seinfeld reference. The Washington Post's Jennifer Rubin called Donald Trump a pathological liar, narcissist, know-nothing who would never run. George Will, who had the privilege of speaking here, actually quit the Republican Party over Donald Trump. George W. Bush's speechwriter, Mark Thiessen, found Trump so unpalatable that when he was on television, he actually defended torture as opposed to defending Donald Trump. This is just some of the mainstream media. And what we saw in the Trump campaign was an individual who's willing to fight back against the media. The statistic that the Media Research Center put out immediately following the election was that 97% of the voters said they did not let the media's bias influence their vote. Think about that. It wasn't that long ago, and many people in this room would remember it, where we received our news from three individuals at 6:30 at night on ABC, NBC, and CBS. They didn't try to make the news, they simply reported the news factually. You didn't know if Walter Cronkite was a Republican or a Democrat, a conservative or a liberal. He just factually reported the news. Those days are over. Now the news is a business of getting clicks and getting your story out and becoming the news. And this was evident just yesterday when Stephen Miller, the senior advisor of the White House, had a press conference, got into an exchange with a CNN commentator, a CNN journalist, I guess, a reporter, by the name of Jim Acosta. But this has permeated the entire election cycle, and we have seen time and time again where reporters want to be the news. And let me give you an example, and I think he's a very fine guy. There's a reporter from Time magazine, his name is Zeke Miller, he's a very fine guy. The day that the president was sworn in on January 20th, he went into the Oval Office, he was the pool reporter that day, and he took a picture inside the Oval Office, and he said, and he tweeted out instantly, and he said, "The bust of Martin Luther King Jr. was removed from the White House." And he intimated that Donald Trump is a racist by removing that. Do you know where the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. was that day? It was in the exact same spot it was for the 4 years that Barack Obama had it there, or the 6 years. But the difference was there was a U.S. Secret Service agent standing in front of it from the location where he took the picture. Now, Zeke Miller didn't call the White House and ask for comment about why the bust was removed. He simply tweeted it out. That tweet and his story received 6,000 additional stories in the mainstream media. And when Sean Spicer called Zeke Miller and said, "Zeke, you're welcome to come back into the Oval. It's in the exact same location. They literally haven't moved it a quarter of an inch since when Barack Obama left office," he put out a tweet and said, "Whoops, made a mistake." The retraction was covered in 38 publications. Not the 6,000 that wrote the original story. This is what the mainstream media has done. They need to be the news. They need to make the news. They're so concerned now about driving a narrative that gets them the most clicks that they've stopped becoming journalists. And the American people have seen this. At the end of President Trump's first 100 days, a study was done. The three major broadcast networks said that ABC, CBS, and NBC from January 20th to April 9th had over 1,000 stories that were focused on Mr. Trump and his new administration. Of that, 1,900 minutes of airtime were dedicated to the president's first 100 days. Of those, 186 minutes were designated as neutral or positive. 186 minutes, which means 89% of the coverage of Donald Trump in the first 100 days was designated by an independent analysis as being negative. And what that has done is brought Donald Trump's social media account and his ability to communicate directly, effectively, and authentically with the American people much further into the light that the American people are now used to. And I have seen it and heard it. Could you get Donald Trump to stop tweeting? Please ask him to put down the Twitter account. His social media platform has 110 million people. That at the click of a button, he can communicate and bypass the mainstream media. He's got 37 million, I think, Twitter followers. 10x what the New York Times publication is, or somewhere in that realm. And he always says it's like going to the New York Times without the losses, only it's much bigger. And some people will say, well, it's not presidential for him to tweet. Well, he's the president. So let me tell you how it works. If he sneezes, it's a presidential sneeze now, okay? What your expectation of what is presidential and what is actually presidential may be two very different things. But he has revolutionized the way politicians and elected officials will communicate moving forward. And I saw this every time we went to a rally somewhere. And it didn't matter if we were in Mobile, Alabama with 35,000 people, or we were in the state of New Hampshire with 1,000 people. People would tune in to Donald Trump to listen to what he had to say, because for almost the totality of the primary, that entire season, 38 primary wins, he didn't use a teleprompter. He would take out a piece of paper. He would have some black writing on it. It was the same one he used the day before and the day before and the day before and the day before and the day before. He might make a different note or two, and he would stand up, unteleprompted, for an hour. And the media was fascinated by this. And the American people were fascinated, because it was a bit like going to a sporting event. You go to watch the Indians, except when they play the Red Sox, because you know what's going to happen, right? When the Red Sox play, they win. That's what happens at the end of the game of the ninth inning with 2 outs and a 3-run home run the other night. I'm just saying. Hey, I'm a Sox fan. What can I say? Right? But you go to the game because you know what the outcome's going to be. You go because you want to see it. It's a sporting event. It's so mind-consuming that you want to go and be a part of it. You want to say, I didn't know it was going to happen, but I was at that event when the guy pitched a no-hitter. I remember that rally where Donald Trump did X or Y or Z, and I think that every person on December 7th of 2015, when we were in South Carolina on a decommissioned warship, probably remember exactly who was there when he proposed a ban on illegals coming into the country, an immigration ban. Probably every person who was there will have a different story about being at that event. But to understand the campaign, you have to understand Donald Trump. And I'll talk about his achievements where we are now, but you have to understand he's the single hardest working individual I've ever had the privilege of being next to. He point blank outworked Hillary Clinton. On the time I was on the campaign, in 18 months, we flew 1,700 hours on an airplane in 18 months. 1,700 hours on an, now, it was a nice plane. It's a very nice plane, okay? It's a big Boeing 757, beautiful, Trump Force One, we call it. I don't care what you do, 1,700 hours is a lot of time in 18 months. That's just on the airplane. That's 2 pilots flying around the country from you name it to you name it. That's about 70 days, 75 days in 18 months, and that's before the campaign really kicked off for the general election. The great thing about the president was he was very predictable, and I could count on one hand the number of times we sat down and had a meal in that period of time. We always said we had the best plane and the worst food, because what we did, and this was the job of the deputy campaign manager, was he had to get the timing exactly right to stop at the McDonald's to get the 2 Filet-O-Fish and the 2 Big Macs, and if we had a really good day, what we called a malted, which was called a shake in the real world, but in New York it's called a malted, to have that at the plane at the exact same time that we would get back to the plane so that the president, then candidate Trump, could eat as we're flying to the last event. That was our life. We ate McDonald's 6 days a week. If we were very, very lucky, which was rare, we might get Chick-fil-A. If we were really, really lucky, he would say, you know what, guys, maybe we'll do Burger King today. That was it. Kentucky Fried Chicken was also a staple on the airplane, because he didn't want to sit down and take the time and waste his time doing something when he could be doing the next thing, because that's what he does. And time was too valuable for us. It was one of those great things, and what he used to say is, look, if I'm going to make America great again, it's a full-time job. We don't have time to sit and eat, Corey. So, yes, sir. And I can tell you, the deputy campaign manager had a very stressful job, because if he was 2 minutes too early and the food was cold, it was a bad day. And if he was 2 minutes too late, we left him behind and he had to get his own way back to the next stop. It's a very stressful environment when you have to deliver the food. But what we also knew, as we progressed through the campaign, was that other candidates in the race would call me and say, Corey, do me a favor. I'm a good man. Please don't let the president tweet about me. Because he's the greatest marketer that our country's ever seen. He has the ability, in a word or two, to talk about somebody, maybe it's their strength or their weakness, and it sticks with them. Does anyone remember what Ted Cruz's nickname was? Lion Ted, right? Or Marco Rubio, Little Marco, right? Or Hillary, or the failing New York Times, fake news. These are all statements that the president and at that time, candidate Trump would articulate at rallies, understand what the response was. If the response was fantastic, he would continue to use it, and it drove the others crazy. I would get calls all the time from these guys, Corey, please ask the president not to tweet about me today, please. These are the other candidates running for president. So we tried to do this, but let me tell you a quick story. We flew a helicopter from New York out to Iowa for the Iowa State Fair. And we landed the big plane in Des Moines, and then we took the helicopter over to the State Fair, and you may remember this. And this tells you the type of person that Donald Trump is. Flies a helicopter out there, we do a spin around the State Fair, and all of a sudden there's literally thousands of people coming because the Trump helicopter says Trump on it, and he goes to land, and there are all these kids there, and and the president, then candidate Trump, turns to me and he says, hey, Corey, let's take some kids for a spin. I said, no, sir. We don't have insurance. Like, I'm a campaign guy. This is not a good idea. We're going to run out of fuel. This is going to be the end of the campaign, which, by the way, the end of the campaign had come 50 times by then, right? And this is just another end of the campaign, potentially. And he says, no, I want to do this. It's very important. I think it'd be great. Think if these kids get to go on a helicopter ride. Pretty cool. So this little boy comes up, and the president, candidate Trump, gets on the helicopter with Martha Raddatz of ABC News. Now, we said, look, no adults. This is just for the kids. So if you're over the age of 12, you can't get on the helicopter. It's like a kid's ride. But she gets on instead, and candidate Trump has a Make America Great Again hat on. An 8-year-old boy gets on the plane. I would think on the helicopter, it's a pretty big deal. It's a gorgeous helicopter. And he's seated across from the candidate, and Martha Raddatz of ABC News is there, and she has a camera. And this little boy, it's a surreal environment. And he gets on the helicopter, and the little boy turns to candidate Trump, and he says, are you Batman? And without missing a beat, Donald Trump says, yes, I am. That's what he said. And with that, boom, helicopter goes up, they go for a ride, and the press is, enamored once again that Donald Trump has driven the media, crazy, doing something that no other candidate in the history would do, which is take kids on a helicopter ride at the middle of the Iowa State Fair. So, look, our campaign did not rely on fancy television ads. We had zero budget in the primary. I spent zero money. We didn't have a direct mail operation. We didn't have phone vendors we had phone vendors who would come and try and solicit our business, and I say no. We're the largest phone vendor in the country came to me one day, and I had an office on the 5th floor of Trump Tower, which had no heat in the winter and no air conditioning in the summer, because that's how cheap I am. I'm cheap. I told the president I will spend your money like it's my own. And this phone vendor came to me, and he said, Corey, I'd like you to hire me. And I'm the biggest phone vendor in the country. I'm going to do all your phones. And I need $25,000 a month plus whatever I do for phones. I said, what? He says, yeah, I'm the biggest. I said, oh, I know who you are. I said, let me make a counter proposal to you, because this is the Trump campaign. I'll pay you $500 a month. You can sit in the back with the interns and answer telephones. If you do a good job on that, I'll move you up to the mail shop. If you do a good job on that, maybe I'll make you work at the front desk, and we might get you to $1,000 a month. And he said, no, you don't understand. I'm a vendor. I don't come here every day. You're going to pay me. I said, see, this is the difference. If you're not willing to come here and work 20 hours a day, like Corey Lewandowski, like Dan Scavino, Hope Hicks, Donald Trump, Keith Schiller, and every other person who walked in that office every day, we don't want you. We didn't have any vendors for the campaign. Zero. Didn't exist. We did all ourselves. Because for so many years, the political class made a lot of money off of losing campaigns with no accountability. The establishment guys, and look, they're my friends, and I don't make any money on those guys because they're all bad guys, honestly. But you know what they do? They'll say, I did XYZ's mail. And I say, yeah, but you lost. Yeah, but it wasn't my fault. Right? There's no accountability. But if I win, guess what? He won because of my mail program. That's how they all, and it's mail, and it's phones, and it's television. And look, a lot of guys make a lot of money doing stuff. I said, we're not going to do that. It's just not how we're going to run the campaign. So we ran it completely differently. And what we knew in the campaign is not only do we have to win every single state that Mitt Romney had won if we were going to be successful, but we had to win Florida, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and of course, the great state of Ohio. And if you watch the news coverage leading up to this election, Donald Trump has to run an inside straight. Impossible. There is no chance he's going to do it. On election day, the New York Times, on their homepage, had this barometer. The odds of Donald Trump winning on election, where this number came from, I don't know. The odds of Donald Trump winning on election day, 0.001%. It's election, not even like 30%, maybe 22%, something. No, 0.001%. And as the poll numbers started coming in, the barometer began to move. And it finally got to the point where it was 99.5% certainty. This was after Hillary actually called and conceded that we still didn't make it to 100%, which was amazing. That's the media. But everybody, many, many, many people, I will say, never believed he would run, never believed that he was serious, and never believed that this was going to be a real campaign. And I heard it, and it put a chip on my shoulder in a good way. You know what they said? Corey, you guys can't even get on the ballot. You guys are so dumb, you don't even know how to get on the ballot. We were the first guy on the ballot in every state. You guys will never file your personal financial disclosure statement because Trump will never disclose how rich he really is. Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, very fine man, both of them, they asked for the 30-day extension because they couldn't get their form in on time. We did ours in 29 days. It was the largest filing in the history of a candidate for office. Trump forces people to be their best. And if you're at your best, you don't get to stay. And believe me, I've seen it firsthand. He is a driver. He is so all-consuming, forces people to do things that, in a good way, you didn't know you could actually accomplish. We ran a presidential campaign with 5 people. You want to talk about a meritocracy? Here's my fundraising meeting. Hey, Mr. Trump, here's my budget for the month. It's about $3 million. Do you think... Next. That was it. That was the fundraising meeting. He puts his initial on the piece of paper. The money gets wired to the account. That was it. We funded our own campaign. And what that did was it shut out all of those donors, and it made them come back afterwards and eat crow. Now, he is a much more gracious man than I am, because I can tell you there were a lot of guys who came to us and women who came to us to say, you know, I was there on day one. Well, I was there on day one. I literally turned the lights on in the building. But the president is so gracious that even his adversaries, he has brought into his cabinet. He has rewarded people who were very aggressive against him in some cases. And maybe the best example is when Rick Perry went to the press club and made a pretty tough speech against candidate Trump. He sat with Mitt Romney and seriously considered him for the Secretary of State position. Has looked at many individuals who spent a lot of money against him and for his opponents, and has brought them in because he is a person who wants to get things done. And Washington is fundamentally changing. So let me just tick through very quickly, and I'll be happy to take some questions. Some of the things that the president has already done. He's withdrawn from the TPP. He said he was going to do that. He's done it. He has eliminated hundreds of government regulations. As a matter of fact, the American taxpayers have saved more than $86 billion in regulatory costs from the deletion of government burdensome regulations since Trump has come into office. He has decided to lift restrictions on the production of $50 trillion of energy reserves. He's talked about and done lifting the roadblocks in the Dakota and Keystone pipelines. He's canceled billions of dollars to the UN climate change program and wants to put the money into America's water and environmental infrastructure. He has appointed a Supreme Court justice that, by all accounts from those on the left and the right, is eminently qualified to be on the bench and will be a long-term successful impact with Judge Neil Gorsuch. He has canceled funding to sanctuary cities. He has begun by removing 2 million criminal illegal aliens who have overstayed their visas and are here illegally. He has trying to, pledged to, repeal and replace Obamacare. That is not done yet. He has pledged to provide the largest tax cut in American history. He has pledged to invest $1 trillion in infrastructure spending. And he has pledged to build a wall. And what I have said was that elected officials need to be held accountable. And the president is my friend. But if he doesn't fulfill those promises, if he doesn't follow through on the things that he told the American people he will do, the accountability is at the ballot box in 3.5 years. And I think the American people are very smart. I think they have sent someone to Washington to make a fundamental and wholesale change because they're sick of the way the system is. But if he doesn't implement that change, and he needs help from Congress, and Congress they're a tough partner. You would think that they would have been ready on day one with a repeal bill of Obamacare. You think they'd be ready on day one with a tax cut package which says, let's repatriate our money from overseas. There's trillions of dollars sitting there. Let's double the deductions for middle-class Americans so they can have more money in their pocket. Oh, and by the way, let's take every sub-S corporation on the planet that is housed in the U.S., and let's lower their tax rate from 35 to 15 so we can have more money to stimulate the economy. Congress did none of these things. They've done none of them. And that's a problem. So what I think is, for the first time, from what I've seen since 2009, the right track, wrong track survey, which is the question that pollsters ask, do you think the country's in the right direction or the wrong direction? They're finally saying the country's moving in the right direction. We've seen the stock market add enormous amount of value. But there is one final thing. Ronald Reagan said freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. That's what we're up against, the freedom of our great country. I believe we live in the greatest country in the world, and I think it is an amazing privilege to be a citizen of this great country. And I'll be happy to talk through the immigration issue, which the White House unveiled yesterday. But I do think this, whether you are pro-Donald Trump or anti-Donald Trump, pro-Barack Obama or anti-Barack Obama, I don't care. You know why? Because I want what's best for our country. It is bigger than any one person. And if we don't do things to take care of our country, and that's not isolationism, people. If we don't do things to take care of our country and make sure that American workers have fair opportunities against a global marketplace for countries that don't want to see us be successful, we will do so at our own demise. And let me say this, I hope that the President brings with him the business acumen that he had running the Trump organization to the White House. And we've seen a few examples of that, the Boeing example as it relates to the purchase of Air Force One. And we've also seen it where he has been very forthright in understanding what the price of something costs at the federal government. And let me just tell you, let me close with this very last story. And this happens in December of last year. He's the president-elect, and he's down at Mar-a-Lago. And I decided to start a small business. And as you all know, as business individuals, you have to have something called an employment identification number, an EIN number that the IRS gives you so you can actually go to a bank and open a bank account to cash checks, or else they get you for money laundering, which is a bad way to start a business. Okay? So my partner says to me, hey, Corey, can you take care of this? I said, sure, I'll go on the IRS website. I go to irs.gov, and they say, the website is down for maintenance. Please call this phone number. So I call. I'm at home. 43 minutes later, I answered the phone. A very nice woman answered the phone. Her name was Mrs. Robinson, and she says, how can I help you? And I said, Mrs. Robinson, I'd like to get an employment identification number because I'd like to start a business. She says, well, the website is down between December 23rd and January 3rd, so you have to fill out the form and fax it to me. I said, what? She said, could you fax it to me? I said, look, Mrs. Robinson, I live in Windham, New Hampshire. I don't know anybody who has a fax machine. If I can find one, do you have this new thing called email? No, sir, we don't have email. The IRS, okay, give me a break. I said, okay, I'll drive 11 miles to the next town over. I'll find the Kinko's that may or may not be open. I'll fill out this form. I'll fax it to you. How long will it take for you to give me the 10-digit random number, 9-digit random number I need to start my business? She says, 7 to 10 business days. I said, what? I hung up the phone. I called the president-elect. I said, sir, you're not going to believe this. The government is closed for business. He said, what do you mean? I said, if my experience is equivalent to anybody else's experience in that period of time, not one small business was opened in the entire period between December 23rd and January 3rd. And I said, we need to do a better job. And he said to me, Corey, we're going to bring a business mindset to the government. We're going to make sure things run properly, and we're going to fix this. And I'll tell you that because I firmly believe that that's what his intention is. And I've spoken a long time, so let me stop. And I'll be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Corey. We'll take just a second. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive of the City Club, and today we're enjoying a forum with Corey Lewandowski, TV commentator and former campaign manager for President Donald J. Trump. We're about to begin the audience Q&A, and we welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, or those of you joining us via our webcast or our Facebook Live feed. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club. You can also leave it in the comments section of the Facebook Live posting, and our staff will work it into the program. We want to remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. Holding our microphones today are Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky, and our Content Coordinator, Teddy Eisenberg. May we have our first question, please?
Thank you. And thank you for coming today and sharing your experiences. They've been fascinating. Last night I was listening to a radio broadcast, and they played clips from President Clinton, President Obama, Harry Reid, and President Trump. They all stated the same security concerns about immigration. They all stated the same economic importance of immigration. And yet, President Trump has been excoriated for saying the same thing his predecessors have. How is it possible that people can switch positions? And you talked about the American public. Do they have such a short memory that Trump is saying the same thing his predecessors did, but there was no backlash for them and there is for him?
Well, you've raised a very good question. And to articulate that point, I want you to just take you back to an executive order that President Trump issued that a district court judge put a stay on, okay? That particular executive order on banning individuals from coming into our country was the prerogative of the president. It's the same exact executive order that Barack Obama used, the same one George W. Bush used, George H.W. Bush used, Bill Clinton used, all the way back to literally World War II. There was never a challenge to the executive authority of the president under that particular statute until Donald Trump implemented it. And I think when you look at what the Supreme Court, the highest court in our land, in a 9-0 decision, 9-0 never happens, okay? Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Scalia, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Roberts, don't agree on many things. But they agree that the president has a legal authority under the Constitution to issue that executive order and overruled all the other judges. To your exact point, the narrative that Donald Trump is doing something that's so egregious and so anti-American is one that the mainstream media loves to say, because Barack Obama actually deported more individuals from our country than has ever been deported so far under President Trump. That's not what the media wants to report. The media doesn't want to report the fact that this is the same rational policy that Harry Reid supports, immigration reform, that everybody, regardless of the ideological spectrum, says has to occur. Nobody wants to talk about that because it's much easier, with all due respect to Harry Reid, to go after Donald Trump because that's what drives media ratings. And he's very, very good at ratings, in case you haven't noticed. And that's why the media covers him that way, because that is, unfortunately, how they become profitable. But I think, I say this all the time, I think the American people are exceptionally smart. And they look past that, and they will hold people accountable at the ballot box, both in Congress, in the Senate, and ultimately at the presidency, if they don't follow through on what their commitments are. And I think what the president outlined, and specifically Stephen Miller outlined yesterday on immigration, it's green card reform. It's a point-based system. It's a system which is very similar to that in Canada and in Australia. And here's how people get points if they want to come and be a citizen of our great country. Do they speak English? Reasonable request. Look, everybody in this room is an immigrant from some nature. Do they speak English? You get a point for that. What is their level of education? You have a point for that. Is the person, have they ever received an award of some nature based on their expertise in their respective field? You get a point for that. Is the person an entrepreneur? Are they going to come and create jobs here? You get a point for that. The system that they outlined yesterday is one designed to bring the best and the brightest. And what we have seen is a failed immigration system, which not only brings some amazing students to our great universities, but then it forces them to go back. You finish first in your class at Harvard or Stanford or Yale, and you're an immigrant, that's what they say. Thank you for your 4 years, you're now going back to your country, you can't stay here. What are you talking about? What world are you in? What are we doing? We want the best here. We want to be the most aggressive. We want to be the opportunity, the melting pot that we have always been. We need a pro-immigration policy, not a pro-poverty policy. And what the president outlined yesterday was the opportunity to come here to the greatest country in the world and have the highest privilege which we can bestow should be designated to the people who have the best opportunity to make our country great. Right now, we bring in about 1 million people a year under this program. That's the equivalent of the population of San Francisco every year. It's larger than the equivalent of the population of the state of Montana. And let me just give you the numbers because I think it's important, particularly here in Ohio. 53% of the people in Ohio support cutting immigration down to 500,000 or lower a year. Supporting capping refugees into the country at 50,000 a year in the state of Ohio polls at 61%. These are the numbers that came out yesterday. And support for eliminating extending families in immigration is at 63% in Ohio. There's a problem. There's a problem right now that this legislation is potentially going to try and solve. Is it going to be perfect? Of course not. But the media doesn't want to cover in the same way what the president has proposed, which falls in line with what many, many other Democrats in the past have proposed, because it's not a sexy story.
Mr. Lewandowski, welcome. Thank you for coming. I preface my question by saying that I am a lifelong Republican, so this is not a partisan question, okay? But I look back on the first 7 months, and I am concerned. I see an organization in the White House totally disorganized, and what happened the last couple of weeks is almost bizarre. I see no major piece of legislation having passed, and yet he blames the Congress for that. If I were Mr. McConnell or Mr. Ryan, I'd be upset. I see mixed communications, things then being corrected. Overall, I see a glaring lack of civility coming out of this administration in the 7 months. A president that goes and tells the police officers, be rougher on the people you're arresting. Going to the Boy Scouts Jamboree and giving a political speech. And my grandson was there, so I was particularly conscious of that. As a Republican, I'm concerned and troubled. And as an American citizen, I'm concerned. What am I missing? What can you tell me why I shouldn't be so troubled, why I shouldn't have such concern as the direction we're going in this administration?
Look, it's a very good question. Your concern is well warranted, and it is not isolated by any means. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the fact that there's 4,152 presidential appointments, and of those, almost all of them continue to remain vacant. I'm concerned about the fact that the administration has allowed individuals to serve in the government and hold over positions that fundamentally disagree with their philosophy on job creation and stopping punitive action against small businesses. The administration has not moved fast enough. That is a failure of this administration. The administration did not do enough homework when it came to getting legislation done. I had the privilege of seeing Senator Lindsey Graham 2 days ago, and he said to me, Corey, I want to help get health care done. Let's block grant the money from the federal government back to the states, and if we can do that, we can get this bill done. Let's put the money back in control of the governors, and let's make sure that everybody's on board to do this. And I said, Senator, that sounds like an amazing idea. Why haven't we done this already? There has been, in 7 months, no signature piece of legislation that has gone through the Congress. Now, I think if you look at the Dow, it had 29 records, including this week. 850,000 new jobs have been created. You know, Foxconn just announced a $10 billion investment. GDP in the second quarter is at 2.6%, more than doubling the first quarter. Economic indicators are good. But I'm very concerned about the fact that we're getting closer and closer to an election cycle, and you're not going to believe this, members of Congress are afraid, right? They're afraid for their own reelection campaigns, and so are the members of the U.S. Senate. They don't want to take the tough votes. They want to kick that can down the road till after, potentially, they're reelected again because they don't want to have to go back and respond to a tough piece of legislation. We've made a pledge to the American people, you're going to get a health care reform bill done. Premiums are through the roof in some places, up over 100% in states like Arizona. Small business owners are getting killed. We need to follow through on that. And I'm very concerned that the administration has not been aggressive enough in putting the right people in place throughout the bureaucracy. And look, is the Senate accountable for slow walking some of those? Yes, they are. Did the president get enough credit for getting Neil Gorsuch through the Supreme Court nomination hearing? No, he did not. Did he get enough credit, in my opinion, for personally intervening and having a hostage release from Egypt, a 30-year-old woman who'd been in prison for 3 years, and getting her out? No, he did not. That was a half-a-day story. I think the change with General Kelly coming in as the chief of staff, a 4-star Marine Corps buttoned-up general, is exactly what this White House needs. You have put a person in place who is a leader of men and women, who have been to the battlefield, who was the leader of the Southern Command, who by all accounts, Republicans and Democrats alike, will tell you he knows what he's doing. And what you need is not chaos in the White House. What you need is consistency. What you need is the president focused on the big picture and implementing his agenda, and you need the staff. And Jim Kelly from Boston is going to be the chief of the staff, not the chief of the president. He's going to go there and make sure that every piece of information that is given to the president is tight and it's right, and it's going to affect our country in the right way. That's what he's going to do. My opinion, that move probably should have been made 3 months ago. But here's where we are. It's the president's prerogative to choose who his chief of staff is. I think we are going to see a dramatic change in the priorities and the implementation coming from the White House. And let's be clear. The communications team at the White House, and Sean Spicer is a friend of mine, and I've known Anthony Scaramucci for a long time. If you would have told me that the House of Cards is going to write a story and Anthony Scaramucci is going to be the character in this story, and that we're going to lay out the next 11 days in the House of Cards, the producer would say, we can't do that. It's never going to happen. Mistake after mistake after mistake. It's time to understand. It's time to get to work. That's what the American people have voted for. That's what the American people need, and that's what the American people deserve. Stability. That's exactly right. Look, you have to, in my opinion, have relationships with people in the House and the Senate to get things done. You can disagree on things. The American people are tired of a stagnant, broken Washington. And it is time to bring people together, particularly the Republicans. They have an obligation with a very short window to get significant changes done. And if they don't get that, I hope the voters hold them accountable.
There's a quote that goes something like, the color of your character is shown not when people see what you're doing, but what you do when you're by yourself. And my question's about golf. And it's widely known, Trump said, I'm going to be so busy working for y'all, I will not have any time to play golf or go on vacations, which we've now found out is not true. And he's getting ready to leave, I think, in the next 2 weeks for a vacation in New Jersey. Anyway, this is a man who cheats at his golf score, who drives his cart on the tee box and the green and improves his lie. Why should we believe anything the man says if he can't even be honest about his golf score?
Well, look, I've never played golf with the president. I will tell you this. He's probably a 3 handicap. I don't know what that means, but it's supposed to be really good. Well, if you want to have a discussion, we can have the discussion. I've never played with the president. If you have, and you've seen him drive on the green that he owns, maybe he should, talk to the owner, but I think he owns the place, so he gets to drive wherever he wants. But let me say this. I've never played golf with the president. I think, by all accounts, he's probably the best golfer as a president that we have ever seen. If that is what the criteria to be a good president is, I don't think it is. I think what he wants to do, and he's played golf with the president of China, and I think he's played with potentially the prime minister of Japan, and I think when Abe was in Florida, they played golf together. If we're going to criticize Donald Trump for playing golf, then we need to criticize Barack Obama for playing golf. And that never occurred. You can't have it one way and not the other. So if you want to be fair and you want to say that Donald Trump shouldn't play golf, then you should have raised the same issue when Barack Obama played golf. That's all. It's fair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lewandowski. Sunday, you appeared on Meet the Press and stated, and I'm quoting, "It's my recommendation to the President of the United States to fire Richard Cordray, who is chairman of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau." This caused Chuck Todd to ask you whether you had a client who wants to see Mr. Cordray fired. And you said, and I'm quoting, no, I have no clients whatsoever.
True.
However, it was reported in the New York Times on Tuesday that among your new consulting company's clients is Ohio-based Community Choice Financial, a leader in the payday lending industry, which has faced heightened federal scrutiny by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to limit certain loan practices. We can all agree that truth and facts matter. So my question for you is, yes or no, is Community Choice Financial indeed one of your company's clients?
Let me be as clear as I can be. as clear as I can be. Whether Richard Cordray is the chairman of the CFPB or not the chairman of the CFPB, I don't make one dime on that decision. Not one. Let me go on to say, Richard Cordray, on Friday of last week, received a Hatch Act violation notification because he is now campaigning for governor, sitting in a federal office. Let me also remind you that the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee on April the 12th of this year, in a public hearing, called for Richard Cordray to be fired. There have been a dozen federal elected officials who have asked for Cordray to be fired. So whether Richard Cordray is the chairman of the CFPB or not, whether his rules are implemented or not, has zero impact in my personal wealth or well-being. But let me say this. Richard Cordray is an unelected bureaucrat. He is promulgating rules that will cost the taxpayers not just money, but also jobs. And my opinion is Richard Cordray should be fired. If he wants to go and run for governor of Ohio, then he should quit his position like everybody else is required to do, come back, campaign on the merits of his case, and let the people of Ohio decide if he's the right candidate for governor. But to be an unelected bureaucrat campaigning, we know that Richard Cordray is coming back to Ohio in September to speak at a Jefferson Jackson dinner where he's going to announce his candidacy. He has told a Supreme Court justice in the state of Ohio he is running for governor. That is a Hatch Act violation. This is exactly... I have answered the question. I don't make one dime. Not a dime. I don't make a dime, is what I've said. Not a dime.
Mr. Lewandowski, my question is that your previous employer is opposed Donald Trump while he was running for president and has not been his supporter at all. So part one. Part two, Roger Stone, I happened to see his documentary about him, and in his quotes...
You're the only one, but that's okay.
That's neither here nor there. But in his quote, he says, the people are so stupid, they see somebody on television, they associate that as somebody great, irrelevant of the fact what they're saying or not saying, and that it is the lower educated level people, the average worker, who will vote for Donald Trump. And he has been, in his whole documentary, he's been supportive of Donald Trump from 1986 onward. How do you justify that statement that the people who elected him he's calling them that they are the lowest common denominator that will elect Donald Trump?
So the first part of your question, you're exactly right. The individuals from the Koch political operation, also known as Americans for Prosperity Foundation, did not support the Trump campaign. It's very clear. He's the President of the United States today. So I guess their influence or their desire to support or not support didn't have a material effect on the outcome of the election. The second part is I will never justify anything Roger Stone has to say. I don't agree with Roger Stone on anything. I will not be asked to justify anything Roger Stone has to say, and I can assure you Roger Stone only speaks for Roger Stone and not anybody in the administration.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Laverne Jones-Gore. First of all, I want to ask you, how is the president's spirit? Because one of the things in my community, perhaps we weren't with him at the beginning, but I'm seeing the tide turn. We're a very conservative community. And some of the things he's done, I just want to say God bless him and thank him for all of the things that he has done for this country. Thank you so much. But I'd like to know how his spirit is with all of this going around him.
You know, Laverne, let me say this. I think nobody other than the 44 occupants of that office can tell you what it's like to be the President of the United States. It must be a very, very, very difficult job for anybody. The President remains upbeat and hopeful, but I also think, he is a bit disappointed in the lack of progress that he's been able to achieve. Because as a business executive, you can traditionally make a decision and you can move forward and that decision is going to be implemented. With the government, it's much more difficult. And with all due respect to the president and his team that came with him, the top 7 or 8 individuals who came to administration had never in their lives, until the day that they took office, had a .gov email address. They were all outsiders, from Kellyanne Conway to Steve Bannon to, right down the list. Hope Hicks, Keith Schiller, Dan Scavino, it doesn't matter who it is. Nobody had, Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, never had a .gov email address. So there was a learning curve. So I think he's a very optimistic person. So I think he continues to be optimistic. And I think the pivot of a new chief of staff has brought a new sense to him of the ability to go get a legislative agenda done, which is something that's of the highest priority for him right now.
Thanks for being here. One word answer. Will you please acknowledge that you decided not to answer that gentleman's question about the police and the jamboree, and this woman's question
I'll be happy to answer
about,
his question about the police
whether
and
or
the
not
jamboree.
you is the company a client or not?
So
Not
you
the
want-
one dime, but are they a
Okay.
client?
Do you want me to answer in one word, or do you want me to answer what you just asked me? Because it's a multiple-part question. So, yes, police jamboree. No, I don't know what you want me to say. So, if you want to have a discussion back and forth, we can do that. But let me tell you how it works. When you get the podium, you get to talk as long as you want. So, let me answer his question. I will be specific to his question. I thought I addressed his question, and I'm sorry if I didn't. I thought I was very fair in my criticism of the administration. If I did not fully address your question, I didn't know it was your job to make sure I address his question, so let me address it for you. Okay? Should the President of the United States have given a political speech at the Boy Scouts? Part of your question. I'm sorry I overlooked that. I understand your grandson was there, and thank you for his service. That is not my decision. It is a decision of the President of the United States, and if he chooses to make a speech on a topic that he wants to choose, you can criticize him for that, and you can hold him accountable for that. Now, is the speech of the Boy Scouts the speech that was written for him and designed to be given at that location? I don't know. I don't work for the administration, but I can see the uproar. But why don't we talk about the fact that I think, I wasn't there, most people who attended that were Boy Scouts were thankful that the President of the United States took time out of his day to come and recognize their service to our great country. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that that would be the larger context, the larger story is that the Boy Scouts, who provide an amazing service, were grateful that the President of the United States came to them and met with them and spoke with them. Now, maybe you have a different opinion of that. Maybe his grandson has a different opinion of that. So we'll address that. The second part, and again, let me apologize. If the president said that police officers should not put their hand on somebody's head as they put them in the car, if that is so egregious that that's what our discussion is about today, not about North Korea and guys who want to kill us, not about individuals, North Korea wants to kill us, don't kid yourself, okay? If our conversation is about whether the police officer, by the way, I was one, and I don't know if you've ever served in a peace officer capacity, but I have for 4 years as a New Hampshire state cop, so I understand the protocols and procedures, and I think everybody should be treated with respect. And I don't think the president said anything other than that. And if he intimated that maybe you don't put your hand on the head of a murderer as you're putting him in the back of the car, wow. I understand what the protocol is, but I also know what the police department is going to continue to do, regardless of what the president says maybe you could or couldn't do.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been participating in a forum with Corey Lewandowski, former campaign manager for President Donald J. Trump. We welcome guests hosted by the Renacci for Ohio campaign and Ulmer and Byrne. Thank you very much for joining us. We also welcome students from John Hay High School. Thank you very much for joining us. Student participation in City Club forums is provided by many foundations, including the William E. Weiss Foundation. I want to thank all of you for being here today. That brings us to the end of our forum. Thank you very much, Mr. Lewandowski. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.